Hey friends, I'm continuing this series on kids and sweets and things that we can do as parents to help empower our children and support them in building a positive and healthy relationship with all foods, including sugar. And if you are trying to normalize sugar in your home for your child, this topic is going to be really important for you, and that has to do with language. So, how we talk about sweets and desserts and all these foods, and also how do we talk to our children and interact with them when they are eating these foods. So, there's two parts that I'm going to address today. And first, just diving right into this, is how do we talk about sweets as parents and caregivers? It's really important to be aware of the fact that little ears are always listening, and our kids are picking up on the messages that we are putting out into the world and the way that we're speaking about food, particularly sweets in general. So sweets and desserts are already highly demonized in our society as it is, and diet culture is definitely a big part of that. And so our kids are already probably picking up on these messages that these foods are bad and these foods are good. We might say those things unintentionally. I mean, of course, as parents, we just want the best for our children, and we tend to recycle things that we hear. We definitely recycle things that we learned growing up as children. And so this is, not intended to shame anyone for your approach to food or how you talk about food, but really just to help you be aware of your own language and to really empower you to maybe try a different approach that can really help support your kids in learning to build a positive and healthy relationship with all foods. So first, being aware of the way we address these foods. The thing is, when we categorize sweets, into its own box by saying, these are treats, or these are, this is junk food, or even desserts, again, that's just how a lot of us were brought up. The thing with this is that it can sometimes categorize food in a child's mind, and they start to build different associations with these categories. So for example, treats, that's a really common word. And that can create a lot of emotional charge around a food in particular. So, when we tell our kids, like, we're going to have a treat today, that, of course, is going to incite certain things in their mind. Similarly with, saying things like junk food. Again, we approach these phrases from good intention, and a lot of these things are just things that we're recycling. But that can have some really negative associations with it that start to, send messages to a child like junk food or this is bad for you. They start to internalize those messages and think like, I'm bad for eating this. We have to remember that developmentally, our kids are very literal thinkers. So they're taking what we're saying at face value because that's just how their brain works. And when they get a little older, they can start to, have some more complex thoughts about different foods and like the nuances of food. But when we categorize things and say this is bad or this is good, they translate those messages literally about themselves. So thinking like, I'm bad for eating this, or I'm good because I'm not eating this, or because mommy wants me to eat that. So we want to try to separate that from food as much as possible. And the way that we can do that is taking a really neutral approach to how we talk about food, sweets in particular, because then we're avoiding creating any negative or positive associations with food. Food is just food, and the way that our children can learn how to eat is not based on categories, but based on their internal cues that are helping guide their food choices. And, this is really remembering that our kids are born with this innate programming that they need to eat with what their body needs to grow at a rate that is right for them. So it's really our job to just offer food, provide it for them, provide a variety, and include opportunities for them to eat different sweets, but taking a neutral approach to it. So our child is not making food decisions based on associations that have been created with these different foods. And we don't want our kids to feel guilty or bad or shameful for eating things that they enjoy, including sweets, which is why we want to be really careful with our language around sweets in particular. So really, I just recommend, instead of categorizing sweets, I recommend just calling it what it is, so like cookies, cake, popsicles, lollipops, chocolate. So really, we're not lumping it into a category. We're just calling it what it is. And that is going to help you take a really neutral approach to sweets and also help your child, it will prevent your child from developing any negative associations around these foods too. So that is one piece to think about when you're considering your language and how you approach sweets with your children. The second part here is to just be aware of how you interact with your child when they are actually eating sweets. So this can be a really hard area for a lot of parents because we want to micromanage our kids sometimes because it helps us feel like more in control, or we feel like, a little uncomfortable with how our children might be eating or the foods that they might be eating from what we've provided and offered them. So this is where I tend to see language slipping out and saying things like, too much of that is not good for you, or, your tummy's gonna hurt if you eat too much of that. Things like that, again, are said from such good intention. I get it. As a parent, I totally understand that. I just want you to step back and see the bigger picture here. And that is, when we say things like that, it can cause our child to have a lot of hesitation with how they're eating, or even create some negativity or some shame around how they're eating or how much they're eating from the foods that we've provided them. So, this is a reality. Like, sometimes our kids' appetites can make us uncomfortable, or the foods that they're choosing to eat from what we're offering can make us uncomfortable. Maybe we're offering a dessert alongside their meal and they go for just the dessert and that's all. They eat the whole thing and they don't want to touch anything else. Our tendency is to want to try to fix that. But we have to understand that that's not a problem to begin with. Again, as parents, we're in charge of providing. Our kids are in charge of deciding what they want to eat from the foods that we've provided. So it's really about offering and then stepping back, and the ball is now in our kids' court. The most important thing here is to just be aware of our language and to try to maintain a neutral stance as much as possible. So personally, I recommend not commenting at all on how your child's eating or what they're eating, because again, in doing that, we're preventing our children from learning how to self-regulate and eat in accordance with what feels best in their body. Because again, the only person living in your child's body is your child. And so it might look different from what your expectations are of how your child should be eating, but we want them to know that they are safe to learn how to self-regulate and to eat what feels best in their bodies, even if it looks like completely different from what we would expect or what we want them to do. Okay. So again, like avoiding phrases like too much of that is going to make you sick, or your tummy is going to hurt, you're going to get a stomach ache if you eat all of that, or those foods are better for you, why don't you try to eat that instead? We really want to try to refrain from that language and really just take a neutral approach. I always tell parents, talk about anything but the food at meal times and just make it a safe and positive experience for your child. So I hope this is helpful for you. Again, it's just some things to think about and consider when you're approaching language and how you talk to your kids about sweets, and also to just be cognizant of how you're talking about sweets yourself. Again, diet culture has created so much negativity around sweets and desserts, and we tend to carry those messages and sometimes we project them to our kids. And this is an opportunity to break those cycles and intentionally create something new for our children. One small little tidbit before I forget is also just being aware of how you talk about food yourself, because again, our kids are listening. So it's easy for us to say, I'm trying to be good, I'm avoiding, X food, or, oh man, I was so bad today, I ate, X, Y, or Z. Our kids are picking up on those messages too. So we just want to be careful and try to take a neutral approach. And that is going to empower our kids to feel good about all foods and to really create positive associations with eating in general. So I hope this helps. Please feel free to leave any questions in the comments below. And I'm also going to include a link to a blog post that talks about this more if you're needing some more support. So, all right, thanks for watching, guys. Take care.